There's something about silence that speaks louder than any scream. The kind of silence that wraps around you when you're alone in the dark, when every tick of the clock feels like a countdown, when shadows seem to crawl just a little too close. This isn't the kind of silence that comforts. It unsettles, it breathes, it remembers. That's where our story begins, not with a bang, but with a whisper from the other side. Hello and welcome to the Other Side Stories channel. It was the summer of 1996 when Tom first moved into the house at the end of Maple Hollow Road. The house had stood vacant for years, hidden behind overgrown hedges and rusted gates, its windows like blank, watching eyes. Locals used to cross the street to avoid walking in front of it. Children dared each other to touch the gate and run. No one stayed long, and no one ever spoke of what came before. Tom wasn't superstitious. He was a contractor who saw a fixer-upper with history and charm. A steal for the price. High ceilings, antique fixtures, thick wooden floors. He bought it on impulse after just one viewing, eager to escape the noise of the city and start fresh in the quiet countryside. From the first night, though, it didn't feel right. The house had a way of breathing. At first, he thought it was just old pipes or shifting wood, but as night stretched into weeks, the noises grew more deliberate. Steps on the stairs when no one was there, doors that opened slowly, not from wind, but as if someone unseen was passing through. The scent of lavender would suddenly fill the room, then vanish, as if pulled away. Tom didn't mention it to anyone at first. He told himself it was stress, isolation. Maybe he was just too used to the buzz of traffic and neon lights. But then he started dreaming. Nightmares of a woman standing in his bedroom doorway, her hair wet, her face pale and unfamiliar. She never spoke, just stared. Then the scratching started. At 3:11 a.m., every single night, there would be scratching behind the walls in the hallway. Not mice, not rats. Something slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. Tom began sleeping with the lights on. He kept his tools nearby, a hammer next to his bed, but the dreams got worse. The woman came closer. Her dress was always soaked, clinging to her bones, and when she turned her head, there was no face. He tried recording the hallway one night, left the camera on a tripod, pointing toward where the scratching always began. The next morning, the footage was corrupted, just static and a faint sound that, when slowed down, almost sounded like crying. One day, his neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore, an elderly woman with cloudy eyes, stopped by with a basket of muffins. "You're brave living there," she said. Tom chuckled nervously. "It's just an old house." She stared at him for a long time. "You ever wonder why it's still standing when all the others around it burned down in '67? He hadn't. He didn't know. "There was a fire," she said, setting the basket down. "A girl named Lily, drowned in the well out back. They say she was pushed, but no one ever found out for sure. Her mother went mad, set the house on fire with herself inside. But this one, it didn't burn, like something wouldn't let it." Tom laughed again, too loudly. "Well, I haven't seen any ghosts." Mrs. Whitmore just smiled and turned to go. "You will." That night, Tom finally went out to the back of the property. The well was there, buried beneath ivy and rotted boards. He pulled the boards back and shined a flashlight down. Only darkness. He dropped a stone, waited. No sound. The nightmares became real. He'd wake up to water on the floor. Though it hadn't rained, his clothes damp, the lavender smelled stronger. One morning, his mirror was fogged over, and in the condensation was a handprint. Small, childlike. He left a note for himself on the fridge. "It's not real. You're imagining it." But the next morning, the note had been crossed out and rewritten in someone else's handwriting. "She is real." Tom contacted a priest. The man came reluctantly and only stayed 15 minutes. He refused to enter the upstairs bedroom and wouldn't say why. When Tom pressed him, the priest said, "There are places in this world where prayers don't reach." The scratching turned into knocking. The knocking turned into footsteps. And then one night, he heard her speak. "I'm still here." He turned, and there she was, in the hallway, soaked, barefoot. Her eyes were hollow and her mouth opened far wider than humanly possible. He screamed. The next morning, his front door was wide open. The house was silent, but a trail of wet footprints led from the well to his bed. Tom packed a bag and fled. He didn't sell the house. He didn't talk to anyone. He just left, as if he'd never been there. The house still stands on Maple Hollow Road, and sometimes, when the moon is full, you can hear the knocking, you can smell the lavender, and if you look into the second-floor window, you might just see a figure watching you, waiting. Months passed since Tom disappeared. The house grew even quieter, yet more alive. It breathed heavier now, thicker air, heavier shadows. The grass around it refused to grow, as if the soil itself remembered what it had seen. The mailbox rusted shut, and the front gate creaked in the wind like a whispered warning. Most who passed it wouldn't even look up, but some did, like Grace. Grace was a graduate student from the city, writing her thesis on folklore in forgotten towns. She'd read about Maple Hollow, old fire reports, a grief news clipping about a missing man named Tom. No follow-ups, no closure. Something about the silence pulled her in. She rented a cabin 3 miles out, and every day she'd drive closer and closer to the house. She'd park at different angles, take photos, ask questions at the diner. Most locals refused to speak. Some warned her to leave that one alone. But she wasn't deterred. Curiosity is powerful, sometimes stronger than fear. One overcast afternoon, she climbed the gate and stepped onto the overgrown path. The air felt colder on the other side, like something peeled back the warmth of summer the moment she crossed. The front door wasn't locked, just stuck. It opened with a moan, revealing dust, cobwebs, and something else. Something that felt like it had just exhaled. Grace stepped inside. She carried a notebook and a digital recorder. The moment she entered, the device started crackling. A faint static, followed by a low hum, like a voice buried deep under layers of distortion. She called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" The hum stopped. The living room was frozen in time. An old couch, an overturned lamp, paper strewn across the floor. On the mantel sat a single object, a photograph. It was dusty, but when she wiped it clean, she saw a man standing in the yard, Tom. In the background, barely visible, was a second figure, behind him, pale, blurred, watching. Grace took the photo, slipped it into her bag. She moved upstairs, careful not to step on the creaking boards. The bedroom door was open. The air was colder. The smell of lavender, faint but sharp, drifted in waves. Her recorder clicked again, and a voice, soft, childlike, whispered, "Don't stay." Grace sat in her cabin long after sunset, the diary in her lap, her recorder running. The entries made no sense on their own, but pieced together with the tape, the photographs, and her own experiences, they hinted at something ancient, something darker than just a ghost. She began cross-referencing dates. May 12th kept appearing, Lily's last day alive, the diary entry, the date carved faintly into the floorboards of the upstairs hallway, over and over. Someone had scratched it in repeatedly, obsessively. Grace made a decision. She returned to the house on May 11th. At 11:59 p.m., she lit a candle and sat in the hallway. At midnight, she whispered, "I know your name. I know what happened. I want to help." At first, nothing. Then the candle flickered. The temperature dropped. And from the end of the hallway, a voice. Too late. The candle blew out. Her recorder picked up another voice, low, gravelly, not human. "She's mine." A door slammed. Grace stood quickly, her breath visible and a sudden cold. She moved to the attic. As she climbed the stairs, the air grew thicker. The walls wept moisture. And the rocking chair in the corner? It moved, slowly, back and forth, back and forth. Then she saw him, a boy, maybe 12, standing behind the chair. His skin pale, almost gray, his eyes dark, too dark, his smile crooked, and in his hands, the locket. Lily didn't listen, he said. Grace spoke softly. "Isaac?" He nodded once. She told. She was scared. She should have kept the secret, he hissed. The attic door slammed shut behind her. She turned, heart racing. When she turned back, Isaac was gone. In his place stood Lily. Her face clearer now, sad, still soaked. She reached out a hand. Grace stepped forward. Suddenly the walls pulsed, like veins under skin. Voices screamed. Lily mouthed something. Grace couldn't hear it. She pulled out the locket, opened it. 2 photos, a younger Lily and Isaac. On the back, together forever, until the well. The attic trembled. From the beneath the floorboards, something rose. Not a person, not a spirit, but a shape, black, liquid-like, with too many arms and no face. Lily turned to it, shook her head. It recoiled. Grace watched in horror as Lily stepped forward, arms outstretched toward the creature. "No!" Grace cried. "Come with me." But Lily shook her head, then mouthed it again. Grace focused, lip red. "Tell them." The black shape lunged, enveloping her, and she vanished. The attic floor returned to silence. The door opened behind Grace. She staggered out, breathless. The house no longer smelled of lavender. It smelled like smoke. She ran outside. The sky had turned a shade darker than night. The house behind her groaned, windows shattered without force. The door slammed shut and refused to open again. Grace collapsed by the well. She heard crying. Looking down, she saw her reflection, and Lily's, beside hers. Not behind, beside. She whispered, "I'll tell them. I promise." Grace went back to the city. She published everything. The diary, the tape, the footage Marcus had left behind. The legend of the drowned girl, the drawings, even Isaac's name. And then strange things started happening. Readers reported flickering lights when they read the article. A mother said her daughter had started drawing pictures of the sad girl in the water. Another man sent an email saying his dog barked furiously at the screen whenever he opened the site. Grace ignored them, until one night she returned home to find water pooled on her hardwood floor. The faucet wasn't leaking. There were small, wet footprints leading to her desk. And on her computer, a new file, thankyou.wave. It played on its own. A girl's voice whispered, You told them. Then silence. Grace never saw Lily again, but she started writing stories, others like it. Places where the veil is thin, where the dead still speak, where the forgotten remain not because they're trapped, but because they're waiting. Far from Maple Hollow, in a different state, a new family moved into a different house. This one had no known history, no local legends, no suspicious past. But their daughter Ella, 5 years old, started speaking to someone no one else could see. "She's wet," Ella said. Her parents thought it was just imagination. She says her brother is angry. One night they found the words, "She told," written in condensation on the bathroom mirror. They moved out. No one knows how Lily found them, or if Isaac had followed. Some say once a name is spoken, it spreads like a curse. A story repeated, shared, consumed. And so we tell the story here, not for thrills, not for fun, but because Lily asked us to. She still waits in the quiet places, at the edge of mirrors, in the well of your dreams. And if tonight you smell lavender before you fall asleep, don't open your eyes. She might be standing there. Some stories are not told. They're whispered, passed in fragments from one trembling soul to another. They carry the weight of what was seen, but never fully understood. The story of Lily and Isaac was not the end. It was only the beginning. Several weeks after Grace published her research, an anonymous package arrived at the university library. No return address. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in twine. It smelled faintly of ash and metal. The librarian, a woman named Evelyn, opened it curiously. Inside were 3 items: a lock of hair tied with red thread, a photograph burned around the edges, and a single sheet of parchment covered in symbols no one could immediately identify. Evelyn, being a scholar of anthropology and ancient rites, recognized some of them. Protective runes, binding sigils, names perhaps. But one symbol stood out: a circle with 3 drops of water beneath it, drawn in a darker ink, almost as if it bled through from another page. Evelyn didn't know it then, but she'd just reopened the gate. That night, the fire alarm went off in the library. But there was no fire, only smoke, curling like fingers from the archive room. When she investigated, she found the tin box had moved. It was now on the top shelf, even though she had left it in a locked drawer. And the hair was gone. The next day, she started having dreams. Not of Lily or Isaac, of someone else. A woman with no mouth, her eyes sewed shut. She stood in water that rose and fell like breath. Behind her, dozens of hands reached upward, not for help, but to drag down. The woman would point, and Evelyn would wake screaming. On the 7th night, she woke up with water in her lungs. She coughed for nearly a minute, drenched in sweat. But the windows were shut. There had been no rain. She burned the parchment. But the mark, the circle with 3 drops, reappeared on her wall the next morning, etched into the paint. Desperate, she contacted Grace. The two met in a quiet cafe, sharing notes. Evelyn brought the photo from the tin box. It showed a family, old-fashioned, early 1900s, a father, a mother, and 2 daughters. One daughter had been scratched out, violently by what looked like nails. Beneath the photo, a name was scrawled: Mara. Grace's face went pale. She recognized the girl who wasn't scratched out, the one still smiling. It was the same face as Lily, or whoever wore her face now. They dug deeper. Mara had died in 1903 in a town submerged by floodwaters. The river had risen unexpectedly and drowned dozens. Some bodies were never recovered. The townspeople claimed it wasn't natural, that something had come with the water, a sickness, a spirit, or a curse. Before the flood, Mara had been accused of water charms, old rituals involving mirrors, wells, and drowned animals. The preacher had written, "She speaks to things below. Her sister Bethany sees her whisper to the cellar floor." Bethany survived. She moved states away, changed her name. Bethany became Lily's grandmother. That's when Grace realized this didn't start in Maple Hollow. It had followed the bloodline, the same way the smell of lavender follows the silence. Evelyn began to document her descent. She kept a journal. It read, "Day 1, the mirror fogged. I live alone. Day 3, my plants drown themselves. The soil stays wet no matter what. Day 5, I heard singing from the sink drain. I recorded it. It sounds like my mother. Day 6, the symbol is on my skin now. It burns when I lie. Day 7, I think Mara is in the well, but the well is in me." Grace read the entries aloud one night and noticed something chilling. Every seventh word from page 1 to the last entry formed a sentence. "You opened the gate. She walks now. Water will find you." Grace didn't sleep that night. Instead, she researched every mention of the gate in historical texts. One theory, from an obscure 1894 occult manuscript, suggested that water could serve as a thin veil, a membrane between the world of breath and the world of memory. A soul trapped in trauma, especially one that died by drowning, could find refuge in this subaqueous threshold. It was called the mercy pool. But sometimes the pool boils. And when it does, something comes out. Grace visited Evelyn one last time. She found the apartment door ajar. Inside, all the mirrors had been smashed. Water dripped from the ceiling, though the floor above was dry. Evelyn's body was never found. Only her voice, on a loop on her answering machine. "We let her in. Don't follow the voice in the drain." Grace left the city again. She vanished from the public eye. But the website she once ran, the archive of Lily's case, the recordings, the footage, kept updating automatically. New photos appeared, new recordings uploaded by users who claimed they'd felt her near. One man submitted a voicemail. He answered a phone call at 3:11 a.m. A girl's voice had whispered, "Tell me a story." When he asked who it was, she replied, "You know me. I live in your faucet." He hadn't slept since. And now you're listening to this. Maybe in the dark. Maybe with headphones on. Maybe alone. If so, take this advice. If your bathroom smells faintly of lavender, if your faucet gurgles after you turn it off, if the mirror fogs, even when there's no heat, Don't speak. Don't say her name. And never, never follow the voice in the drain. They called him Father Mallory, not because he was a priest, not anymore, but because he was the only one who had been to the house on Cedar Bridge Lane and come back speaking in full sentences. He never smiled. He never raised his voice. But when he spoke, people listened. Grace had heard of him through an old online forum where survivors of veil encounters shared their experiences. Someone mentioned him in a thread titled, "I heard her in the pipes again. Who else has met the girl?" Most dismissed the idea, but not Grace. She tracked him down to a retirement home just outside Angeville. He was thin, pale, and blind in one eye. He didn't look up when she entered the room. "You smell like the old water," he said. She froze. "You've seen her." Grace nodded, not that it mattered. "I need to know what she is." Father Mallory took a long breath, as if preparing to speak for the first time in years. "She's not a ghost. Ghosts forget. Ghosts wander. She doesn't forget anything. She remembers all the pain, all the betrayal, every moment of drowning." "What is she then?" "She's memory, weaponized. She's the scream no one heard, the truth buried under silence. When enough people ignore death, it becomes something else, something unholy." Grace didn't speak up. She let him continue. "Years ago, a boy named Isaac locked his sister in a well. Said she talked to shadows. Said the water told her secrets he couldn't hear. When the village elders found out, they sealed the well. Not to trap the body," he paused, "but to trap what came out with her." Grace clenched her fists. "And now she's free?" Mallory turned to her finally, his one good eye focused like a blade. "No. She's still drowning, every second, over and over. And every time someone remembers her name, she gasps, and the well grows deeper." Grace left without saying goodbye. Some say stories are harmless, that they are simply fiction, tales whispered in the dark to pass time, stir fear, or fill something beyond the mundane. But stories carry weight, especially those that carry names, especially those that echo. And this one echoes still. A month after the fire in Maple Hollow, the town saw a strange occurrence. The river that had once trickled behind the town changed course. No rain, no quake, just movement. One morning, the water vanished entirely. What was left behind wasn't dry riverbed, it was mud. Deep, black, breathing. They tried to fill it, dumped gravel, sand, even concrete, but it sank, like the earth had a mouth. They called in geologists. What they found were tunnels beneath the town, narrow, organic, lined with something resembling cartilage. And at the end of one tunnel, a circle carved into stone, with 3 perfect drops beneath. The workers refused to return. Back in the city, Grace tried to live a normal life. She taught, occasionally lectured, and avoided screens after dark. But she could never quite shake the feeling of being watched. She avoided mirrors, unplugged all drains in her apartment, slept with the faucet wrapped in cloth. But one night, as she graded papers, a familiar smell crept through the air. Lavender. Soft, faint, lingering. She stood, slowly, eyes scanning the room. Nothing. Then the light flickered. Her laptop turned on by itself. A new file sat on the desktop. RememberMe.mp4. She didn't open it. She deleted it. Or tried to. But it came back. Again. And again. Each time renamed slightly. RememberMe2.mp4. Tell them I was kind.mp4. Do not close your eyes.mp4. Finally, she opened one. Static. For 10 seconds. Then a whisper. There's a place up north they don't mark on maps anymore. A small village once called Nettle Creek. The land was cheap, the roads were quiet, and the sky stretched forever. But now it's gone. Erased. No wreckage, no ruins, just vanished. Those who remember it speak in hushed tones, if at all, and when they do, they mention only one thing. The day the water rose backward. It started with fog, thick and silent. It rolled in one morning without warning and stayed. By noon, every well, ditch, and faucet began gurgling. The air smelled of iron and lavender. Phones rang all at once, landlines and cell phones alike, with static on the other end. Then came the girl, wearing a silk dress, barefoot, smiling. It wasn't Lily. Not entirely. Her features were wrong. Just slightly. Her smile a little too wide, her eyes a little too reflective. And her voice, it wasn't a voice. It was the sound of rushing water pushed through hollow pipes. At exactly 3:11 p.m., every drain in the town filled with black water and burst upward. People drowned in their kitchens, in their bathtubs, in their own breath. And in the middle of it all, the girl stood perfectly still, watching, remembering. Only one man survived, a janitor at the local elementary school. He'd been mopping the gym floor when the flooding began. He climbed into the crawl space and stayed there for 22 hours. When he was found, he was covered in handprints. Small ones. Hundreds. None of him his. He never spoke again. Only wrote one sentence on the wall of his hospital room. She has no name anymore. Grace read the reports. Quietly, in hiding, she saw the pattern forming. This was no longer a hunting. It was an infection. Not spread through touch, but through memory. The more people knew her name, the more places she could reach. Not as a ghost, but as water itself. Pipes, wells, mines. She remembered how Father Mallory once said, "When pain is ignored, it congeals. When it is shared, it evaporates. But when it is feared, it spreads." Grace made a choice. She would find the origin. Not the well, not the house, the first place Lily ever drowned. Not in water, but in silence. Through old letters and whispered names, she discovered the story of Bethany, the older sister of Mara, the girl from 1903. Bethany had survived the flood, but she had gone mad in the years that followed. She spoke of a song beneath the soil, of a mouth that drinks screams. She drew wells on every wall of the asylum where she was confined. She scratched the number 311 into her skin. And when she died, her last words were, "Forgive her." Grace tracked her burial site to an abandoned graveyard near a dried lake bed. The lake had no name, either, just coordinates. She went there alone, at dusk. The place was still. No birds, no breeze, just silence. She walked the lake bed, boots cracking dry mud, and then her foot sunk. She looked down. The soil was wet. Just in that spot. She dug with her hands, found stone, then wood, then a handle, a hatch. She opened it, and beneath, stairs. The air inside was wet and warm. The smell of lavender almost burned her nose. She reached a chamber, circular. It's been 5 years since Grace last saw the girl. 5 years since the world fell silent again. The stories stopped. The emails stopped. No more fogged mirrors. No more dripping drains. No more Lily. People moved on, as they always do. They called it hysteria, a mass delusion, a meme gone too far. They filed it under urban folklore and left it there to rot. But silence isn't the end, it's the warning. And now the warning has returned. In a new city far from Maple Hollow, a child has gone missing. 8-year-old Millie Fisher. She disappeared from her bed one rainy night. Her window was locked, her door untouched. But the drain in her bathroom sink? Wet, clean. Despite the fact the house had no running water for 2 days due to city pipe repairs. On the mirror above the sink, written in streaks, "Where is Grace?" Grace saw the news by accident. She wasn't looking for it. She hadn't searched her name in years. But there it was in her suggested articles. The girl, the mirror, the water, and the question that pulled her back into the current. Where is Grace? She didn't sleep that night. She didn't eat the next morning. Instead, she took the notebook from her shelf, the one wrapped in black cloth, the one she swore never to open again. Inside were old letters, drawings, forgotten symbols, names long since erased. And taped to the last page, a Polaroid of the well, burned edges, still wet. She knew what it meant. The girl was back. Or maybe she had never truly left. Grace returned to Maple Hollow. What was left of it, anyway. The crater where the house once stood had filled with moss and silence. The townspeople were mostly gone, moved, vanished, or buried. But the trees still remembered. The wind still hummed the lullaby Grace heard in her dreams. She followed that sound, deeper into the woods, until she reached a tree she'd never seen before. Twisted, blackened, leafless, but alive. At its roots, water bubbled, a spring, clear and quiet. She leaned down and whispered, "I'm here." The water stilled, then a voice beneath it said, "So am I." Back in the city, strange reports began again. People hearing crying in their sinks, strange reflections in screen glare, children whispering to mirrors, always at 3:11 a.m., always the same question: where is Grace? But not in fear, in longing, like they missed her, like they remembered her, like she was the only one who ever listened. Grace knew what she had to do. She opened her old laptop, long since dusty, keys sticky, battery bloated. But it turned on. Immediately. No boot screen, just one folder. Echoes. Inside, thousands of audio files, most labeled with dates, some with names, a few labeled simply yours. She clicked the first. Static. Then breathing. Then the voice of a little girl. Do you remember the dark? Another file. More static. Then I found others. They're scared. Another. Will you help them too? And finally, a file with no name, just a time code. 0311. She clicked it. Her screen went black. Her speakers hissed. And then Lily's voice. There's another well, but this one was dug with lies. Grace didn't understand, not at first, until she started researching again. This time not for wells or water, but for institutions, places where children were silenced, abandoned, forgotten. She discovered a hospital, closed in 1978, for ethical violations. No charges were filed, no names released, but in a lawsuit from the archives, one patient claimed, "They said the water would clean me, but it only made me forget." The patient's name? Mara. She drove 12 hours to reach it. The building was still standing, crumbling, wrapped in vines, windows shattered, but the front door still perfectly shut. She entered at dusk. Inside, the smell was not lavender. It was rust, old books, and something else. Regret. She moved through halls littered with beds, restraints, peeling paint. She found the hydrotherapy wing. Sinks lined the wall. Basins large enough to drown in. One still held water. She approached. Her reflection rippled, then changed. Not to Lily, but to her own face. Younger, sadder, eyes red with grief. And behind it were hundreds of others, staring, waiting. She dropped to her knees and whispered, "I'm sorry." The water responded. Then listen again. And she did. One by one, the stories poured from the walls. The forgotten children, the silenced girls, those who drowned not in water, but in shame. And Grace knew then Lily was never alone. She was never just a ghost. She was a vessel, a voice, a memory shared by the voiceless. And now they all spoke through her. They had chosen Grace, not to haunt, but to tell, to carry, to echo. And so Grace wrote once more, this time not as a warning, but as a record, a voice not for the dead, but for the unheard. And you're hearing it now, not because you were chosen, but because you listened. And listening is how it begins. If you remember this story, repeat it. If you dream of water, speak her name. But if you smell lavender, and the lights flicker, and the drain begins to whisper, don't be afraid. Say, I remember, and maybe, just maybe, that will be enough. There is a strange kind of silence that follows a story told too many times. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind that feels like being underwater with no surface in sight. That's the silence Grace lived in now, since she reopened the veil, since she listened again, since she remembered. The letters came first, not by post, by hand, left at her doorstep in the early morning. No footprints, no motion from the camera she set outside. Just envelopes, each containing a single line. We heard her too. We never forgot. She sang to me before I fell asleep. Where do we go now? Grace began collecting them in a shoebox. Within a month, she had over 70. Then came the photographs. Old, sepia-toned. Children, always alone, always standing near water. In one, a girl stood at the edge of a pond. In another, a boy sat beside a bathtub filled with dark water, eyes blank. And in all of them, if you looked closely, was a faint figure reflected in the surface. Sometimes a girl, sometimes just eyes. Grace started mapping the origins of each letter and photo. A pattern emerged. Every location formed a spiral across the country. At the center, an abandoned coal town in Pennsylvania. Name long erased from maps, locals called it Hollow Creek, where, according to fragments from county records, dozens of children were reported missing between 1890 and 1945. Most of them were last seen near water. Grace traveled there under the weight of all the stories she now carried. The town was a skeleton. Half-buried houses, a crumbling church, cracked roads overtaken by roots. She wandered until she found what she was looking for. A church basement with a rusted metal door, sealed by chains and years. She broke them. Inside, the air was thick with rot, and something else, grief. As she stepped deeper, she saw the walls were covered in carvings, symbols, names, dates, circles with 3 drops underneath. But at the far end of the hall was something different, a mural, painted in oil and ash. It showed a well. At the bottom of it, a girl curled up, her face turned away. Above her, dozens of children reached down, their arms outstretched. Not to pull her out, but to join her. Then, Grace saw the door beside the mural. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single chair, a drain in the floor, and a mirror on the wall, already fogged. They called it the house with no sound, no address, no mailbox. Just 4 rotting walls standing deep in the forest where no map dares draw a road. Locals claimed it didn't exist, even those who had seen it, even those who'd been inside. Because once you leave it, if you can, you forget. Not just the house, but what you heard there, what you saw, what you became. But Grace remembered, not because she had been inside, but because the house came to her. One night in her dreams. She stood outside it, in pitch-black woods. No stars, no moon. Just the outline of the house pulsing faintly like a heartbeat in the dark. And the door, slightly ajar. As she approached, she heard the voice. "You remembered us, but not all of us." And then she woke, her ears ringing, her sheets soaked, the smell of wet wood clinging to her hands. She found it the next day, not on a map, but buried in the oldest letter from her shoebox. A sketch, crude, childlike, of the house. Beneath it, a caption, "Where the rest are kept." The return address was just coordinates. No city, no state. She followed them. 3 days' drive into the heart of nowhere. The trees grew too close together. The sun barely reached the ground. The deeper she drove, the more distorted her compass became, until it spun wildly and then stopped. At north. But the sun was setting directly behind it. She got out of the car and walked. The forest whispered her name. Branches didn't snap beneath her feet. They exhaled. And then between the trees, she saw it. Exactly as in the dream. Rotting boards, shattered windows, a slanted chimney. No path, no porch. Just the door, wide open now. She stepped inside. The air didn't feel old. It didn't feel stale. It felt expectant, like the house had been waiting. The floor moaned with every step, dust rose in clouds, but didn't settle. Paintings lined the hallway, their images shifting slightly every time she looked away. Children with blacked-out eyes, women with mouths stitched shut. One painting depicted a mirror, but her own reflection didn't appear in it. Instead, it showed Lily, standing alone, whispering. But no sound came, just silence. Total, crushing silence. And then, screaming. Not from her, not from outside, from under the floor, from inside the walls. Voices, hundreds of them, speaking at once, screaming, laughing, crying, pleading. Grace fell to her knees, clutched her ears, but no matter how tightly she held them, the sound got louder, until it stopped, like a switch flipped, and a single voice remained. "You opened the door." She looked up. Lily stood at the end of the hallway. Not a ghost, not a memory. Something else now, something in between. "I set them free," Grace said. Lily shook her head. "No, you gave them volume, but you never gave them silence." "I don't understand." "You told their stories, but who heard them?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't have one. Lily raised her hand, and the walls of the house began to bleed. Black water running in rivers down the faded wallpaper, pooling at Grace's knees. From the water, shapes formed. Hands, faces, eyes that blinked without tears, and voices again. But this time, they whispered one name, over and over. Not Lily, not Mara, not Grace, but Mother. Grace turned to Lily. "I'm not." But Lily pointed, and behind Grace now stood a mirror, and in it, not her, but Bethany, the sister. the one who lived, the one who watched, the one who never spoke. And Grace understood this wasn't about Lily, not anymore. This was about the watchers, the ones who stayed silent, who knew and did nothing, who forgot, who moved on. Bethany had lived, but she had buried everything, and Grace, in trying to remember, had only awakened what Bethany had sealed. Lily was the voice, but Bethany was the key, and Grace was Bethany again, faced with the choice to forget or to stay, to be the door or to be the wall. The floor cracked. The house groaned. Water spilled upward, defying gravity. Lily stepped forward. You have to decide. What happens if I stay? Grace asked. They can rest. And if I leave, they find someone else. Grace looked around. At the paintings, at the water, at the mirror, at her own face, no longer just hers. Then she smiled, tears falling freely. Then let them rest. She stepped into the water. It welcomed her, held her, like arms, like memory, like truth. The walls stopped bleeding. The screams turned to lullabies. And Lily vanished. Back in the waking world, Grace's cabin stood empty. Her journal sat open, one final line written. To listen is to carry, but to carry is to love. No one ever found her. No police report was filed. But the stories stopped again. This time, not because people forgot, but because, at last, someone had stayed. And you? You're still here, still listening, still wondering what was real. If you smell lavender tonight, don't be afraid. It means she's at peace. But if your reflection moves when you do not, if your faucet drips at 3:11, if you hear a knock from the drain, then remember, this is not a curse. It's a call, a request, to listen, to believe, to carry someone's silence into the light. It's been quiet for a long time now. No more voices, no more reflections staring back when they shouldn't. No more whispers in the drains or knocks behind the mirrors. The silence feels different this time. Not the heavy kind that waits to explode, but a silence like snowfall. Gentle. Final. But stories never truly end. They rest until someone stirs them. And now, someone has. In a distant city, far from Maple Hollow, far from Grace's cabin, a construction crew unearthed something they couldn't explain. They were digging the foundation for a new luxury apartment complex. The site had once been home to an orphanage, long since demolished, its records sealed. They found the sealed stone chamber 6 feet underground. No door, no windows, just a perfectly circular room, empty, except for a single object in the center. A mirror. Still intact, still clean, and fogged, though no moisture had touched it in decades. They lifted it out, unaware of what they'd brought back. The mirror was taken to an antique dealer. She hung it in her shop window. That night, her security cameras went black for 3 hours. In the morning, she found writing on the mirror's surface. She listened. Will you? Within days, people began reporting strange things. A customer claimed to see a girl standing behind him in the reflection. A boy whispered that he heard water when he pressed his hand to the glass. And at exactly 3:11 a.m. each night, the mirror fogged, though the shop had no plumbing, no heat, and the glass was pristine. Then one night, the antique shop caught fire. Nothing else in the building was damaged, only the mirror melted. But the fog remained in the air for hours. And when it cleared, the words, "Not finished." Somewhere else, a young woman named Clara read an old blog post, one of Grace's, archived on a forgotten mirror site. Clara was a trauma counselor, burnt out from years of carrying pain that wasn't hers. She read about Lily and Mara and the symbol, circle and 3 drops. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She printed the blog, read it aloud to her empty apartment, and when she finished, she wept. Then her faucet turned on by itself. She approached slowly. The water ran cold, steady. And when she looked in the mirror above the sink, she didn't see herself. They say endings are quiet, that they arrive gently, like the last page of a well-worn book. But endings like this, they don't whisper. They echo. Clara stood at the edge of the lake that hadn't been on any map. Not even satellite could see it. Yet, it was here. Still. Flat. Breathing. The locket in her hand was warm, pulsing faintly, like a second heartbeat. She had followed every sign, every whisper, every story. And now, the water called her too. But this wasn't a summoning. It was an invitation. The shoreline was lined with stones, each one etched with a name. Some faded, some fresh, some written in languages no one spoke anymore. These were the names of the forgotten, the silenced, the lost. She walked past them all until she reached the center of the curve, where one stone glowed faintly. It didn't say Lily. It didn't say Mara. It said Grace. Clara fell to her knees, touched the name, and the water stirred. The lake did not ripple. It shifted, lifted, as if the surface had never been liquid, but a veil. And through it, she saw faces. Grace, Lily, Evelyn, Bethany, even Isaac, smaller now, softer, no longer twisted by silence. They looked up at her, not in pain, but in peace. Not as ghosts, but as stories finished. Clara spoke aloud. You're not forgotten. You're not feared. You're loved. With each word, the wind picked up, the trees bowed, the sky darkened, not with storm, but with memory. The water rose, not to drown, but to lift. And Clara? She didn't run. She stepped forward, shoes sinking, legs disappearing, until the water met her heart. And then she stopped. Because they were rising too, the voices, the echoes. All around the world, those who had carried the story, those who had listened, felt it. At once, the hush, the warmth, the sigh of a story coming home. Somewhere a child slept peacefully for the first time in years. Somewhere a woman who had never cried finally let go. Somewhere an old man saw his sister in the mirror and whispered, "I'm sorry." And somewhere, perhaps near you, a faucet tripped once and then never again. The house in the woods collapsed gently. No explosion, no flames, just wood returning to soil. The last painting faded, the last mirror broke, and the last whisper was a thank you. Clara awoke by the shore. The locket was gone, but her hand was wrapped around a stone, blank, waiting. She smiled, reached into her pocket and pulled out a pen. She etched a single name, yours, because she knew now this story doesn't belong to Grace or Lily or her. It belongs to all of us. Anyone who has ever screamed and not been heard. Anyone who has ever drowned while still breathing. Anyone who has ever carried a silence too heavy to name. So tonight, as you turn off the lights, as you pass by the mirror, as you wash your hands, and the faucet makes no sound, smile. Not because it's over, but because you listened. You remembered. You honored the silence and transformed it into voice. You were the echo. You were the vessel. You were the final page. And that is what sets them free.